Bound.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, right.
Well, the lost has been found,
Thanks for the bump in blood pressure.
and we are happy to have Father Clint Moore with us this morning. And I think I'm gonna close this door because it's a little rowdy out there.
Just close the doors.
Okay.
Was that it? Thought-
Well, okay,
Sent you a.
Clint is
Enough.
a renowned Episcopal priest, ethicist,
Goofball.
hospital chaplain, and all around good guy. And we're so fortunate to have him here. And do you need more now, Clint? I'm not sure.
Trying to get through my coffee and. So good morning, everybody. Clint Moore. And, I'll tell you just a little bit about me, although this is really not about me, but just, why would I be talking about this stuff? First thing, most priests do not learn much at all about grief and mourning and loss in seminary. We do have most seminarians are required to go to some type of healthcare facility during the summer after their first year, called clinical pastoral education, where you learn how to be a chaplain in a hospital or a nursing home, and you pray with people or you talk with people. And there is certainly loss and there's grief and there's mourning, but there's rarely a lot of instruction or encouragement to read about it. But I did because I wanted to go into hospital chaplaincy, although I didn't wind up in hospital chaplaincy for very long. I worked for after seminary, I worked for a local hospice, Rainbow Hospice, for 10 years, something like that. And as a chaplain. And during that time, I was asked to facilitate widow and widower groups. Sometimes we had combined groups with widows and widowers. Sometimes we had separate groups. And then for 25 years, even after I left the hospice, I did grief groups for adolescents, mainly junior high school, which is very cool. I mean, they're just cool folks. I know, they're teenagers, but they're still very cool folks. And then I worked after, a couple of stints or during a couple of stints as an ethics, in an ethics fellowship at Lutheran General. I did studies in ethics, and I was the ethicist at Lutheran General and the Advocate Aurora system for about 30 years.
Can I ask you to just speak up a little bit?
Sure.
Because,
You need it too.
well, because some of us need
Okay.
a little more volume,
I can
and
do that.
there's a lot of stuff going on around us.
Gotcha. So I read extensively in ethics and in death, dying, and bereavement, and I was certified, for what it's worth. I was certified as a fellow by ADEC, the Association of Death Education and Counseling, as a fellow in death, dying, and bereavement, which I've now let go because it's expensive to keep up certifications when you aren't technically working anymore. So, that I guess that background in loss with hospice, my ethics consults were mainly about people who weren't going to do well. So, if you met me by the end of our hour and a half or 3 hours, whatever it was, you knew things weren't going well. So it was generally about some significant loss. And I guess I really want to dispel the notion that we have to, even though we generally think about loss as death, it can be any significant loss for you. It can be obviously a loss of a loved one. They can die, they can move away. It can be a loss of a dream, loss of a job, loss of a future that you had planned. So any, significant loss, or that you feel is significant, you can feel those, have those feelings of grief, which are many. So, I'll talk maybe I'll just mention that the W Club, I have to thank them. Nobody likes to join clubs like that. But you're invited, at some point, you get an invitation, maybe not in the mail, but you have a significant loss of someone, and you're instantly in that club that nobody wants to join.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, the W Club sponsored an evening with a video from Grief Share, which is a Christian group that formulates a number of programs around loss and grief. And we watched probably 30 minutes of about an hour-long video. I think the video what we watched was a helpful video. I'm just going to speak about Grief Share in the video from a facilitator's perspective, not from a participant, because I was asked to be the facilitator. Grief Share is a very conservative Christian group whose belief platform I'll let you look up. You can just do I think it's griefshare.com, griefshare.org. Just look up Grief Share grieving program and you'll find it. I don't support their belief system. There's many things that I could bring up, but probably the one that I, as a facilitator of grief groups, I would say is probably the biggest, the thing I don't agree with is that unless you accept Jesus Christ as your personal savior, you will never heal from your grief.
Right.
Oh.
So it kind of leaves a lot of people out.
Right.
And I think groups ought to be, if there is a group, an ongoing group here, some people want to do that, that's great. Then it ought to be open to everybody, regardless of your faith system or belief system or lack thereof. I think it probably is more helpful for me to ask you what questions you might have, because I don't want to just keep talking and then you say at the end, which you still may, try to do it in the parking lot or the privacy of your own home too. I wish he had said something that was helpful. But what are some of the questions that you have about, I know that it's Blue Christmas, but I think any holiday or anniversary we could put in there. Blue wedding anniversary, blue birthday, blue first date, blue, anything that brings you back to that point of loss that you had with that person. But what are some of the questions that you might have that I might try to at least address?
Feeling stuffed up, like not even knowing how to start to express or understand what I'm feeling. Just feeling that I get that a lot, is just feeling like a box of tissues. And I'm like, well, there's a couple of marbles of things I'm feeling, but I don't even know how to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I know the state of Illinois has become another state that has accepted the concept of death by choice, I think.
Okay.
You know, and I know I mentioned that to you several months ago. That would be the ethics and the issue of that relative to in relationship to our faith. Be a great sermon, if nothing else.
Put that on your sermon.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that last part of
No,
it, but
so-
what created all the laughter.
He said it
Yeah,
would make
right.
a good sermon later on.
I mean, it's a little dire, but
Just a minute.
I think it's something that
Yeah.
needs to be addressed.
Well, I've made apologies about sermons, in the beginning, that this is what I'm gonna talk about. If you don't want to hear this, please take the next 2 minutes to grab your hat and coat. If people have left. Anything else? I mean, yes, please.
Ambiguous grief, I don't know what you call that, but
Ambiguous grief.
like preparing, knowing you're going to lose your loved one.
Okay, so anticipatory.
Anticipatory, yeah,
Yeah.
ambiguous.
Yeah,
And I think
Yeah. part
part of that, correct me if I'm wrong, Susie, but part of it is if you have a loved one who has had some medical thing that has altered them, like
yeah.
a stroke or the word I can't think of because I have it.
Dementia.
Yes.
Was that clever or do you?
Not that I know of,
Okay.
but the people who have it know that they have it, so
Yes and no.
So-
My mother
so-
didn't think she had it.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that would explain a lot, wouldn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, and this just goes back to my point that really anything that causes a loss. My mother had, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's for 10 years. She probably had it longer because usually the diagnosis is 3 to 5 years after, at best. And then she survived another 10 years after that. Yeah, and there was certainly grief around, she's not the person I knew.
Yeah.
We don't have the same relationship, even to the point that, when I should talk a lot. When I took Jane down, maybe the second or the third time, she didn't know who I was.
Mhm.
That was a big slap in the face, if you want. I mean, I just didn't expect that. But let me go back to, one thing about grief, and I was just checking my notes, some of the research I'd done on death and dying and bereavement. So many of you have probably heard of Kubler-Ross. And Kubler-Ross did her work at University of Chicago. If you go down into the, I don't think you can get there anymore, but you go into the basement of the original building, they have all of the medical staff that was with them at that time. And probably 1967, 8, 9, 70, she's there. I think it was 69 that her book on death and dying was published. And it's, if you ask, well, let me just ask, how many people have heard of Kubler-Ross? So, if I were to ask you, what are the stages of grief, you could probably name at least two or three, somebody could name five, all five of them. So, denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. Well, so it's interesting that in her first book, which she was the only author. Her second, and in the preface, it said, I'll be talking about the stages of grief. And so everybody took that as gospel, that this is what you do. Hop along, you do the little bunny hop from this to this to this, and then you finally get to acceptance and I'm done.
The ladder of ascent.
Right. And so her second book, which the second edition, which I think came out late the next year, had a chaplain as her co-author because she had used his research to write the book. If you go down after 70, she's no longer there. She was excused. If nothing else, University of Chicago is where fun goes to die.
Yeah.
It also goes, it's also where
Plagiarism.
unacknowledged
Yeah, goes to die.
research gets booted. So she was asked to leave the medical staff for not treating this research appropriately. But anyway, in the second edition of the preface, she said, I never intended for these to be stages that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so we could just sort of dispel that, because there are a lot of people that are just angry. Angry is their thing. They're angry from dawn till dusk, and when they wake up in the middle of the night, they're angry. And that's how they handle, or they're in denial, or they don't know how they feel. But Americans like this thing that I can look at these steps, I can do them and feel vindicated, and that I've achieved, I can check off the boxes and I'm done. And so if we can dispel that and also dispel the notion that time heals all wounds, it just doesn't. I don't know that I necessarily believe it forever, because everybody grieves in their own way. So, the purpose of a group, whether it's around, it's an ongoing group or whether it's a discussion about the holidays, is really to see, what can I learn from someone who's either where I am, or someone who's 2 years down the road or 10 years down the road. Are there things that I can learn without having to go? I still have to process them myself, but maybe I can, oh, wow, that's right. Joyce said this. Wonder how if I can use that to help process what I'm going through. Hey, Nate. To touch on what Josh mentioned, not knowing how to express yourself, or what your feelings are. Sometimes a group can be helpful. There are folks who just were not meant for groups, and they know it. There are folks who are not meant for groups and they don't know it. So you're going to get, you're going to get folks who will,
Let me share.
yeah,
And there are people who think they're for groups, but they shouldn't be there.
right. So anyway, we had this young guy, in one of my adolescent groups. He was a freshman at Maine East. His mother was a nurse at the hospital, who I know. His father committed suicide. his mother knew we did this program at Rainbow Hospice called Good Morning, MOURNING. And so he came, and the only requirement was that you said your name, who you lost, how, if you're able to do, how they, and what brings you here. And so his answer was always, hi, I'm John. My father committed suicide by shooting himself, and I'm here because my mother forced me to be here. Sometimes he would say that she handcuffed him to the bumper of the car and drug her. But that would be on a good night. And that's all he would ever say. When he was a senior, a freshman, his father committed suicide. He came to our group. After the group, John came up to me and said, you know, the principal asked me to be the big brother of this young guy because he knew I'd been to a grief group for 4 years. And he thought I could sort of help him process some of this stuff because we had similar loss, similar method. And I said, but John, you know, you never say anything. He said, yes, but I always listen. So there are people who will come to a group and say their name and that's it, and that's fine. They just aren't ready to participate, or they don't feel they can participate. So, I mean, groups, you know, can take on any number of things for people, and they should be there for that person. There shouldn't be expectations about how people participate or not. And I guess expectations is a good thing to talk about holidays. I mean, let's just say you had a significant loss earlier in the year or this summer or maybe last month. And now here's Christmas. Well, are there expectations that either you have or your family has that everything's going to be just the same? You know, when my father died, well, I was never asked, but things were so we ate at our dining room table, which we never ate at unless it was a holiday or we had guests. My father always sat at the head of the table. My father always carved whatever it was that he had cooked. So I come in and there's the turkey and there's the carving set and the chair is pulled out and everybody's sitting there looking at me. Going, you know, you're sitting there because you're the man of the house. And so, you know, what are your expectations around that holiday, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, whatever it is? What are your expectations? You know, if you've always done things around your anniversary, wedding anniversary, or maybe celebrated a particular day in your relationship, what do you do? What do you expect's going to happen when that comes around? And so expectations can really, if you choose not to process your expectations, they can really sort of sink the ship that time around. You know, I think when folks, I'm gonna paraphrase, but you let me know if I'm not paraphrasing correctly. So not knowing how to express my feelings.
Outside and inside, like knowing the picture I'd give is just like, I know I've got different types of feelings, but when I try to think about it, it just feels like just all cotton balls. I can't tell what's what.
Okay. So and this again is this I won't say that we all do it, but many of us do tend to try to think through our grief. It needs to make sense up here. All right. So you very clearly, to me, you're pointing down here, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's either, it's either jamming up the works, or it hurts, or burns, or all of the above.
Yeah.
But it's not up here.
Right.
So possibly we can let go of, okay, just tell me what is going on down here. What is this? It doesn't need to make sense. And I'm not talking for Josh, but if I was, talking about my father, I would say, well, I'm now 29, but I feel like a little kid. And I don't know what to do. I want to talk with him about what do I do next. But that's not, if we can put that in feeling language, it feels like. So I'm going to put you on, spotlight dance. Tell me one thing it feels about how it feels. Just one thing,
Right.
How it feels.
I'll use that. So this is going to be probably the third of losing my mom. So, it was very sudden. It was 7 weeks from hearing that she's got stage 3 to her being gone. And then she was sick a lot before that with other things. So I think I feel like I feel like I haven't actually, I've wanted to connect with her for like years, but it's been so difficult for so long, and now it's never going to happen.
Okay. Can I ask you to rephrase one thing? Because you said, I think I feel.
Yeah.
So can we leave from here? I know you have to talk. But can we leave the think out of it? Just how does that describe the feeling itself? Does it have a
I feel-
color? Does it
yeah.
have a texture? Does it have?
I feel in knots. I feel in knots.
Okay.
I feel, and it's big.
Okay, so not big knots. So then, someone might say, well, then grieving or mourning, we tend to sort of conflate the two. So mourning is how we work through our grief. Grief is the feelings and the thoughts, but all of the things that we have, the yearning, the separation anxiety, the longing, the loneliness, the knots, is how do we loosen those knots? How do we get them so that they're not so tight, so that you can follow some of the strands of those knots to other, and sort of like, so it was last week, Jane got out this, it's really not, it's probably about a 7-foot length of these little glass lights that she puts over a large mirror that we have. Well, they were just all, they were too. And she's, I hear her because which she doesn't like for me to say, but I'm going to share it anyway. One of her signs of frustration is,
Yep.
that's it. It's this breathing thing. And if it's, I know when it's directed toward me, it's very clear. But it was not, because I was doing something else, which I was sort of going, yay, it's not me. It's the lights. See how that feels. And I said, let me do it, because I love, and if you have a necklace at home, I just love to sit there, and one of the things that you have to do though sometimes is loosen up a knot to get the other one to loosen up, because you have a knot. So you you have to loosen up one to get to the other one. So how do you lose? Well, you can talk about feelings. And you did a great job of, well, big knots. That's two big words. And so learning how to talk about how it feels rather than how you think you feel. Or how you think what you should say. I mean, and this is in response to, well, what is the right thing to say to someone who's had a significant loss? What about after this meeting? And I want to go tell Josh I'm so sad to hear about his mom. What's the right thing to say? There isn't a right thing to say.
How about, I know how you feel?
Everybody's favorite.
Yeah, please don't, because you don't.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so the
in the best place.
young guy, the senior whose father had committed suicide. I mean, the similarities were eerie. They had both committed suicide on January 4th. They had both used the same kind of gun. They had both used it while the rest of the family was away at the the Independence Day parade in Park Ridge. They were both juniors in high school. Both moms were nurses. So you might say, well, yeah, I really know how you feel. No, you don't. You never do. One, it's bringing your head into the game. Again, I know. And two, you have these wonderful things on the side of your head that we tend to defer to this thing on the front of our face instead. So there's I think it's Epicletus said, you know, your creator endowed you with two ears and one mouth, use them in those proportions. So if you listen twice as much as you talk, you will never say the wrong thing because you'll always be listening. And, you know, but we all have friends who don't listen well. We probably have friends who do listen well. So one of the exercises that we did with the high schoolers, I mean, that you can almost, we did them with actually all of the kids, was you draw you put yourself in the center, put a little dot, put me, or you can write your name, and then you can draw a circle around you, and then another circle, and then another circle. You can draw as many circles as you want. Who would be the person or persons that you would put as your closest support, and why? So, you know, you might put Martha. Well, why? Well, because I could invite Martha over for coffee. She would sit there for 2 hours and listen to my story from beginning to end without interrupting me. Just listen. And that is a gift that not everybody has, because we might want to say, oh, you know, you told me that last time. You want to just skip to the end? Well, no, because the story it's in its entirety is what is healing, not in part. Yes.
I wanted to come back to this idea of thinking and feeling. Because I have that trouble. I'm very analytical. And that's problematic sometimes. But I do kind of try to be a therapist to myself. And and so I'm moving back and forth between the analytical part of my being and the feeling part of my being. And I can use an analytical stuff capability to try to pull apart the knotted up parts. And I do it best on paper. Not everybody can do it that way. Some people have to do it verbally. With another person in some other way. But for me, just sitting, well, eventually to a computer screen. Because I edit and I reorder and I reshuffle and then I use an analytical question of what I just wrote. Say, wait, that's not all of it. That's part of it, but there's more to it. There's more energy there. What is that energy? Where is that coming from? So those kind of questions are analytical questions, right? But I'm
Not,
getting, yeah,
I think in part they can be.
Yeah.
But if, and I'm not gonna press Josh any further, but if I was to say, if he said big knots.
right.
So if I was facilitating a group, one of the couple of the rules about groups is everything that's said in a group stays in a group. So you don't go out and say what someone says without their permission. But if I was to say, you said big knots. If I said, knots of what? What are the knots made of? I guess you could say that's an analytical question, but I'm really more interested in how it applies to him, how it makes him feel. It's like dealing with the person that you're having trouble with. Saying, when you do this, I feel a certain, I had a boss, which fortunately I have no longer. That just never worked. She never caught on to what I was after. That, I've been doing this project that you gave me a month for, and you're calling me 3 days after to find out how I'm doing. When you do that, it makes me feel, and I would share with her and she would go, well, okay, but I still need to know. So anyway, that's wonderful that you can do that. Not many people have, I think there are a number of people who don't have that talent or skill. There are a number of people who think they do, but really don't, who think that they are really very good at questioning themselves analytically and questioning themselves on a feeling level and really aren't. Yes.
Many years ago, Jan and I went to our bar mitzvah. And the rabbi who delivered the message during the service talked about a situation that happened in the Mediterranean where a yacht with celebrating Jewish family was boarded by terrorists and everybody was murdered. And the rabbi said that anybody that didn't feel the same level of intensity about the crime was as guilty as the perpetrator. And I told our host quietly off on the side, I said, I don't believe what he said is logical. Listen.
Yeah. I think it goes back to that someone, I've frequently said we should never use should when we're talking about loss and grief. And I mean, for me to say, David, that's really nice, but you shouldn't do that. You just shouldn't do that. Well, that would be rather, first of all, it's kind of stupid. It's presumptuous of me because if it works for you, that's great. Yes, and I was gonna go to Joyce.
Oh.
Yes.
Well, that did make me think, you know, the saying you should, not to shit on yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I heard from Josh when you were talking about the knots and the relationship with your mother, it seemed like unresolved stuff. And I think a lot of grief comes from things,
Mhm.
things,
Yes.
things that are unresolved,
Mhm.
situations that are unresolved, or relationships that are unresolved, or things that, like, if
Mhm.
only I'd had a little more time, I could have done this, you know, and I think that that can create those knots because of because no matter when you lose somebody, no matter if you expect that loss or not, there are going to be things that you feel are unresolved.
So a couple of things, taking what you said, what Josh said.
Yes.
The anticipatory grief. You know, losses never happen at the right time. They either, you know, sometimes I wish that my mother, that I had not seen her decline to the point that she did not know who I was. And then there are other times I'm so happy, even though she didn't know me, that I could still go down and see her and give her a kiss and, you know. So, you know, the anticipatory grief is that mourning that we're able to do around feelings that we have before the loss. But many people are then surprised that when the loss actually happens, well, wait a minute. I did this 10 years of, you know, hard work. Don't I get a break? Aren't I done? Well, no, because now you have to grieve the loss. You were anticipating the loss, but now it actually happened. So, you know, as long as folks understand that there's still grief around that. One of the things that, and I think I think it's popular, called continuing bonds. It's how do we continue the relationship with the person whom we've lost, or the relationship that we've lost. And this sort of comes out of William Wharton. Wharton was a psychologist and therapist. Late 70s, I think, came out with 4 tasks. I don't know that I'll remember them all, but you have to be able to deal with the reality of the loss. You have to process the feelings. You should find a way to maintain a connection with the person you have lost. And then the last one is you have to be able to embark on a new path without that person. So it's developing a way, whether you call it continuing bonds, continuing relationship, finding a way to maintain a connection that you can still communicate. Maybe you write letters to your mom.
I think that ties back very nicely with something you said at the very beginning of this, is that notion that here in America, we love to have those stages and to be done. And the reality of life is you're never done. So the idea that you're going to resolve anything is flawed fatally.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
So looking at a way of trying to, how do I continue to exist with a relationship with this person, even though they're not here, because you're never going to tie up all those loose ends.
No.
You're never going to put them in a box and be like, all right, now I'm done with my mom.
Yeah.
Right.
Because the instant you think you
You're never
do,
done with your mom.
yeah,
Or any-
the instant you do, that you think you're done, something will come up. That box will fall off the shelf from under the quilt in the dark closet that you have it locked up in.
Uh-huh.
You know, and you know, people will years later. Had a woman I used to counsel, couples that were going through the loss of a fetus. They would have you know 2 eggs implanted. These were folks high risk pregnancies. They would have IVF and they would have, say, 2 embryos implanted, and they would wind up with 4.
Oh.
Well, you know, that whether you think about it or not, the risks of a healthy pregnancy in the United States are about 50-50. That's from an OB. You know, we think, oh, you get pregnant, you have a baby, everything's good. So these were both of the embryos had separated, and now you went from 2 to 4, and 2 in one sac and 2 in another sac. Well, 1 in one sac had died, and if left unattended, it was going to kill the third one. And if left unattended, it would take the whole pregnancy, and if left unattended, it'd probably kill the mother. So what do you do? So anyway, we talked about this, and I said that, you know, the task that you have, you and your partner, will be to celebrate, hopefully, the birth of a healthy child, while at the same time you grieve the loss of the other children. She said, not going to do that. I'm a senior VP downtown. You know, I'm getting a promotion. I'm going to just put my head down and work through this. And I went, good for you. I said, here's my card. Call me when that doesn't work anymore. 10 years later, she calls me and says, I don't know if you remember me. I said, you're the senior VP who is going to work through your grief and have it all done. She said, yeah, it didn't work.
Yeah.
So she said, we were going to have a counseling session. And she said, where should I start with my story? I said, at the beginning. So I think I'm expected to.
One thing I want to throw in, and that is, we used to have our students talk to an empty chair.
Yeah.